Your campaign regarding family courts, can you tell me, firstly, how did this come about?
It originally came about through my own story and my own experiences. I then started to speak to other women who campaign, and it was Victoria Hudson that actually got me more and more involved, and Rachel Williams, and we started to campaign for family court.
But first, could we go back, how did you end up in the family courts?
Oh, sorry. So I ended up in the family court because of my own case. I left my ex-husband after he was abusive. My daughter at the time was 3 months old. There'd been a lot of coercive control, mental abuse, and eventually he was physically violent. When the police then got involved, I left him. Unfortunately, after that, he continued to be controlling and violent in some cases, and he actually threatened to stab me. So after that, I did stop access, and then he proceeded to take me to court. And it was then that I had my own experiences that then spurred me to campaign or start to campaign for this.
And the problem you had, you could have fought this privately, so to speak, or not under any campaigning. What caused you to want to campaign?
The other experiences of other women that I came across and their stories, I realised that it wasn't just an isolated incident, and this was a far bigger problem and greater problem within this country and within the system. And changes needed to be made. The problem is I think a lot of women that go through this process, they're so traumatised by it, by the abuse they've suffered, and then the systematic abuse from family court and CAFCAS. They're often ignored sometimes by police and other people higher up, that they can't find the strength to then fight, and they don't know where to go with it.
So you've been in contact with people like Robert Halfon. How did that come about?
I started to email Robert about my own case and asking for some help, and then I started to speak to him about some new laws that we want and bills we want passed within Parliament under the Domestic Abuse Bill. So I spoke to a woman called Laura Richards, who is very impressive. Her CV is very impressive. She's a behavioural analyst and has had her hand in many law changes within this country. So she set about that she wants a database set up that is very similar to the sex offenders database. So abusers will be traced and tracked and monitored. This will enable us to, or the police and authorities, to track patterns and their behaviour, but it will also put the ownership of abuse on the abusers rather than the victim, which is really important.
What will you quantify or describe success in what you're doing?
For now, we are asking for justice within the family court system. So in light of the domestic abuse bill and the reviews that have come forward from that, it has been recognised that there needs to be an overhaul of family court. Magistrates and CAFCAS seem to have a real lack of education around domestic abuse, around drug abuse, and around childhood trauma. We know that childhood trauma is linked to all sorts of mental health issues, and if you are witnessing as a child any type of abuse, then that's going to have a mental effect on you. And magistrates, when taking their decisions into consideration, don't take this into consideration at all, and neither do CAFCAS, and they often label a lot of abuse as historic, which for a victim of abuse is traumatic and it's undermining, but also to do that in front of the abuser and perpetrator is to then condone their behaviour and allow them to continue that. So they allow continuation of abuse. So that lack of education, we're hoping now has been recognised within the domestic abuse bill, but now we want to reinforce that, and we also want justice for children or magistrates that have ordered unsafe contact. And in some cases where children have been removed from the safe parent and put into the abuser's hands. And this is something that's really harrowing, because it's often used within family court to silence women. That threat to literally remove the child and then put them with somebody who's abused them and possibly abused the child. And that's a real abuse of the system.
Are you surprised, again, we're not talking about the specific case, but are you surprised what you've experienced regarding courts?
Yes, I am. I think, like a lot of people, we just assume that we are living in the UK in 2020, and this just doesn't happen. And the reality is quite shocking, and the reflection of that is the fact that 2 women a week in this country end up dead at the hands of their partners and ex-partners. During this lockdown, I think it's been something like 28 women that have been killed, and a number of children also by their fathers. So it's really maybe started to open people's eyes. A lot of MPs have had to back this, because it can't be denied any longer, and that's while women and children are dying at such a pandemic rate, it cannot be ignored anymore, and there needs to be a change overall.
Change of tack, fundraising. You're
Yes.
raising funds. How are you raising funds, and what are you doing?
So I am doing a trek up Ben Nevis on the 3rd of October of this year. I'm raising the money for Rachel Williams' charity, SUTDA, Stand Up for Domestic Abuse. She is another survivor of domestic abuse and now runs a charity. She's also an ambassador for the Freedom Programme and does some really amazing work. So we are raising money for that charity. I'll be doing the trek. But also we want to raise awareness of what we're speaking about and what we're doing.
We as a country have come a long way in regards to domestic violence, haven't we? But we've still got a long way to go, would you agree?
We have a hell of a long way to go. Like I said, 2 women a week in this country die at the hands of their partners or ex-partners. And when you have evidence of that and a lack of movement with police, family courts, all this has to come together. And there needs to be a hell of a lot done. That's quite a shocking statistic.
Are you in some ways proud of the way you've stood up in this situation, and where you, as a person, as a woman, and that all you've done so far?
Yes, but I think it's not something that's necessarily come naturally to me. It's something that I feel that needs to be done, and it's not just me. There are hundreds of amazing women that fight and have been doing so for a really long time. So yeah, I am proud, but my main goal is to make change for not just myself but for all women, and also because I have a daughter who is going to grow up in this world and in this country.